So I'll call the light board meeting for February 22nd to order. And we'll begin with meeting and minutes. We have a meeting coming up on March 8th, and we have another meeting coming up on March 22nd. And then the other meetings are listed on the agenda. I don't think we have any minutes. I didn't see minutes going around for review, so I don't believe we have any ready for discussion.
And I think March is the last month that we can do fully remote meetings. So I think we have to go through.
Okay. You were working on the meeting room. Is that work completed or still in progress?
It's still in progress, but we're set up to do it. It's just not going to be to the level we want. So some equipment's ordered and coming in, but just something to keep in mind. I'll double check to make sure that that's still accurate. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to think about. So we're allowed through the month of March, or March we have to begin in person?
I'm pretty sure it's through the month of March, and then it's hybrid and in person. And when you're in a hybrid scenario, you have to have a quorum of 3
and the chair.
And the chair.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
I'll send a memo out to the board. Look into it a little bit more and send some more detail out.
That'd be very much appreciated. I think that we can plan so far for the March meetings to continue this way and allow you guys to get ready, and then in April, ready or not, here we go. Dave, would you like to take the first agenda topic of time of use opt-out rate? Yeah,
so a while back, the board had, took a position that there would be an opt-out rate for the time of use. So if a customer did not want to participate in the time of use, they had a place to go. And I think we need some direction from the board on exactly what the thinking is on that rate. There's a couple different options. It's, continue with the current R1 rate, which is the tiered rate structure, do just a flat rate, and for us to establish that, we need to get some feedback from you guys on what you're actually thinking. I don't want to spend the time creating something and then find out it's not what the board's desire was. So that's kind of where we are. I'm looking for some feedback, some input from the 5 of you, or the 4 of you today.
Okay. So the tiered structure right now is with the peak expenses. So I think just a basic flat rate would be my preference. Something that is the same meter fee as the other rate, but then has a flat cost per hour that's above the average of the time of use. Warren, your thoughts? I think you're muted, Warren.
Yes, sorry, and sorry for being late. I lost track of time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, Brian, but my initial inclination is we should keep the tiered system, because we should not create a system where somebody who is a profligate user of electricity is able to avoid a time of use rate and benefit from not paying a fair share towards our peak costs, because they're paying the same price for every kilowatt hour. And I think keeping the tiered rate would give more of an incentive for people to move towards time of use.
That's good reasoning. Wendy, your thoughts?
So I guess I just wanted to comment that I would prefer sticking with the tiered rate. I know that we've had some discussion about whether that really provides an incentive to reduce usage, but still believe that there's something there that's beneficial, and I guess along with Lauren's point around the peak cost, that I'd vote for the tiered structure, and I'm fine with the current R1 structure.
Okay. Another question I would have is, should we break out the expenses on as we do on the current R1, or should we just simply give a flat rate that says, here's what it costs for the first number of kilowatt hours, and here's what it costs for the next group of kilowatt hours, and so forth?
Do you mean including the distribution energy or just the capacity and transmission?
Well, that's the question. Should we list all of those components, or should we just lump it into one number on the bill?
I mean, I personally vote for the detail, but part of it's an administrative question too. So,
Warren.
Yeah, on that question, is it an extra burden on the light plant to break it out? Or does it not matter one way? Is it just a question of preference, or is it easier to keep things not broken out?
Yeah. I'd let Laura answer that.
So, I mean, we currently break it out, and Carol, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not believe that since we currently have the software program to do that, that it would be any additional burden to break it out. I think the benefit might be for customers who find sometimes the bill detail too, minutia, and would prefer to just know what they're paying per kilowatt hour. So, yeah, I think administratively we can do it. Carol, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I'd also like to talk about the opt-out rate being, we've talked about it for people who have a smart meter and just want to receive a flat rate structure. And then we've also talked about it with people who don't want a smart meter and want an analog. So Dave, can you talk a little bit about how you feel we should approach that component of the opt-out portion?
Yeah, so we do have some customers, not a lot, that don't want a meter, smart meter or radio meter. And they currently have an analog meter. So that has happened. We expect to have a small number of customers that are looking to do that on a percentage of the total customers. So, hopefully it's a small number as we're expecting, but time will tell.
And there would be a flat monthly fee associated with driving the truck out, reading the meter, and so forth, in order to, and that would be only applicable to those receiving an analog meter, not all of those on the opt-out. Is that correct?
For the ones that we have to do a truck roll, yes, there should be a separate fee to cover the cost.
and then Dave, is there an install fee for that too?
That's a good question.
I think there was. I just can't remember where we landed.
I believe the board has already voted on this.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that
civil
right?
policy, right?
I believe that was voted on, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just kind of wanted to clarify the difference between having an opt-out rate with a smart meter and an opt-out rate with an analog, because I think of our past discussion was focused on the analog meter and the opt-out rate. So there are
It's different, right? I mean, you have people wanting to opt out of the physical meter.
Mhm.
And we've already established an opt-out rate with associated costs for both ongoing reading of the meter and install, if you choose to go back and forth, reinstall and uninstall. But this is something separate. This is if people want to opt out, not of the meter, but of the rate. Because there could be people that are willing to accept the new meters, but don't want the time of use rate. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is what should they pay if they want to opt out of the time of use rate. And I'll just mention that Baker Tilly was asked this question when they did the last cost of service study, and they did provide us with opt-out rates, both on a flat basis and on the same tiered basis that we have now. And when designing that rate, we did ask them to make the opt-out rate on a cost of service basis slightly higher to discourage opting out. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that percentage was 4%.
Yeah.
And so the board also needs to let us know whether that's the direction they want to go with now, making the opt-out rate some, modestly higher than the cost of service, or whether they want it to be equal.
I want it to be modestly higher. The reason being that the only reason why a customer would want to get out of time of use, still keep the smart meter and get onto this rate was because they felt that they were going to get more financial value out of being in the opt-out. And people may do this, without data, or people may do this with data. But if there's a customer out there that all of their use happens right around our peak, the opt-out rate would be more financially beneficial to them, but would increase our expenses. And so we'd want that opt-out rate to be at least somewhat higher than the average. So Baker Tilly said 4%. I would think 5% or or more, but not more than 10. I don't think we have to go crazy.
So Brian, just to be clear, you're looking for 5% if someone opts out. Is that on 5% on top of the existing R1 tier rate or on a flat rate?
Right.
So if you take the time of use and you find what the average value of that is, I would say 5% more than that would be the thinking that I have. But that's just my thinking. I don't know. Pam, do you have any thoughts on this? I've heard from others, but I want to continue the discussion from other members as well. Oh, I think you're muted, Pam.
Okay, first of all, I'm sorry, I was late. First of all, as to tiered, yes. And as to the higher, if you're asking me about the higher from Baker Tilly to 5 to 10, I really don't have a strong view on that. I don't know what the implications of that would be. Baker Tilly has its reasons. I'd have to go back and look at that. So I don't really have a point of view on 5 to 10, if that's your question.
Do you have a point of view on equal or greater?
Greater.
Okay.
Brian, I'd support that also. 10% though feels way too high.
Okay.
I'm more in support of Baker Tilly's the 4-5% range.
Did you say Baker Tilly? Wendy, sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, Baker Tilly's recommendation was, when we had talked about opt-out, to make the rate about 4% higher.
Right. Okay. So you're support. You don't want to go 5 to 10. I'm just checking for the. Okay.
Yeah, 5% is probably okay, but 10% just feels high.
But
Okay.
on what basis, Brian, would you be recommending 5 to 10? I mean,
I don't have. I haven't sat down and studied it, but I do want to make sure that customers, when they compare the time of use rate to this opt-out rate, that they understand that it's more expensive to opt out. And if their usage pattern is all during peak hours and not during off-peak hours, they may still decide to go to the time of the opt-out rate. So
let me answer. So what you're saying is there are two ways of looking at it. One is to get all the costs internalized by the user, and that would go to, the cost of the trucks coming and that sort of thing. And then you're adding on a second objective, which would be behavioral change, right? Where you were suggesting that we should increase it to discourage that approach. And from that point, if that's what you're saying, then I think we need to know whether there's any meaningful distinction. What changes behavior? Does 5 to 10? Does 4 to 5?
So I'm not so much. The time of use rate will do a good collection for when people incur expenses. So that's going to be, good, fair cost recovery. The opt-out is going back to this flat rate structure. So if someone is on time of use where we're having fair collection and they decide to go to opt-out, the reason would be they want an analog meter Or the reason would be they feel it is less expensive for them to go to the opt-out. And I want people not to find that answer, that it's less expensive to opt out of time of use. So I want it to be high enough that that math doesn't pencil out for them.
So but don't we accomplish that by making them pay the extra cost of getting
So there's,
as long as we make the costs fair and reflective of the actual expense that it costs us to allow opt-out, doesn't that take care of
but the flat rate isn't designed for cost recovery, because we don't have a kind of a rate class. We don't have a pattern of usage to determine what fair collection is.
I see.
We would still do that, even if it was an R1, right? We would make our best effort to do cost of use, make it cost-based, right? And so remind me again, so what was Baker Tilly's justification for the higher cost? Was it because it's administering a different rate? Or do you recall?
No, we requested that they put some
Like
sort
that.
of financial burden into the opt-out rate for the very purpose that Brian is stating, that we wanted to not make it attractive to opt out, and that people wouldn't be gaming the system.
Yeah.
If they're peak users, and they know it, opting out would give them would help them shift the cost to the other users. So this was a way to try to prevent some of that.
And another point to make is, with an analog meter, we don't have the time intervals to understand when they're consuming electricity. So someone could request an analog meter, do all of their energy consumption during peak hours, and that would create big expenses, but we wouldn't know that. That's why we couldn't really, determine exactly what fair cost recovery would be for an opt-out. Warren.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand whether Baker Tilly had a rationale for the 4% number as opposed to some other number. The reason I say that is, if they had a rationale, I would tend to go with that, because then we say we commissioned a study, the experts came in and came up with this number, and we're going along with it. If there wasn't a clear rationale, then something like 5% might be good, because it's a nice round number. But was there a rationale for why it was 4% and not something else?
Laura, do you know off the top of your head, or?
I don't believe there was like an extensive economic study like Warren is talking about. I mean, I think my recollection is that we asked them to make it somewhat higher, and how they or we exactly landed on 4% is a little, I would have to do some more digging, and I don't know if I can actually come up with the answer, Warren.
Okay.
Pam?
Yeah, I mean, actually, that was what I was sort of implicitly getting at earlier. I assumed that Baker Tilly had a rationale for a 4%, and that gives me a lot of comfort, as Warren described. If there's no rationale for any of this, I think we should have one. I mean, 4% is 4%. It may be simply an intuitive reaction that we think that that is what will generate thoughtfulness on the part of the users, but I would hope we would have some at least narrative rationale for why we are doing 4%. And it may be as reductive as, it's an incentive structure of sorts, but I do think we need to know why we're doing it.
Well, I think we're doing it for the reason that Brian stated, that we want to put some cost onto people to discourage those from gaming the system, if you will.
Yeah, but I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly which cost, whether it's 1%, 2%, 10%, I think is somewhat arbitrary, because we don't have any data and we don't have a way to get data. So we have to be somewhat, when we start setting this rate, I think it's, going to require us to be a little bit arbitrary about this, because I don't know of a way to quantify, and justify a rate with the absence of any data to support it.
So I would, is there any way to go back to the Baker Tilly study and see whether there was any kind of even narrative rationale there? And if not, is there any value in us being transparent and saying we have really not got a rationale, but we think that the one provided by Baker Tilly, our consultant, is as good as any, and as Warren suggested, sort of lean on Baker Tilly, and if not, I don't understand what the difference would be between 4, 5, and 10.
Yeah. Do either Dave or Laura want to respond, or I'm going to go on to Warren? Okay, I'll go on to Warren.
Yeah, so I was going to say, yeah, following up on what Pamela said, which I think makes good sense, even if their rationale was only that in their experience, they thought a 4% difference would be sufficient to send a signal, even if that's it, and it's not based on any detailed analysis, but that a 4% difference seems sufficient to send a price signal, that's still something to hang our hats on.
Okay. Dave, how do you feel this discussion has gone? Do you feel you kind of get a sense?
Oh, let me try and summarize what I think I've heard. I've heard three, you say that you're interested in staying with tiered rates. One, interested in a flat rate, and you're interested in an increase to discourage. The number, we haven't established that yet. So the question I have is, if we stay with the tiered rates, are we saying we're going to increase them by a percentage each tier to incentivize people to go with time of use? Is that what I'm hearing?
Increasing in the tiers, in the sense that, like, the current R1 has an increase as you go up in tiers. So you're asking, should we keep that increasing structure?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of the board say they're in favor of an increase. And are we applying that to the existing R1 rate with the tiers? And does it get applied to each tier? Or are we talking about you're interested in an increase on a flat rate?
I would tend to argue for, 4% on every rate.
I would too. Now, is that distribution energy also, just to be clear?
Yeah, so we kind of need to establish that as well.
Right.
Yeah, I feel it has to be 4% for the total cost of a kilowatt hour is the increase, not a 4% increase of just the capacity and transmission. And I'm not fixed to a flat system. I'm not fixed to a 5 to 10% increase. If the board wants to stay with the R1 structure and do a 4% increase, I'm okay with that.
I'd support that.
I support that.
So
Did that make sense?
Yeah, would one of you summarize what you guys are supporting so we get it right?
Let me see if I can do this correctly. So if you look at the R1 structure and you use that structure with the values for whatever given year, and then you add 4% of the total kilowatt hour cost to the tiered part of the capacity and transmission structure, then I think that's what we're saying. Does that make sense, Laura?
No, but I will maybe try to come up with a numeric example.
Yeah.
To make sure that we're capturing what you're saying in words, correctly.
So Brian, just so I'm clear, what I heard you just say is 4% on the tiered capacity and transmission charges.
Yeah,
Right.
I was trying not to.
Well, but I think that's what we need to be clear about. The R1 has a certain structure to it. So are we saying
Yeah.
4% just capacity and transmission, or all the kilowatt ones, including distribution and energy?
Well, let's say that a kilowatt hour costs 15 cents in the first tier. And I don't know what 4% of 15 cents is, but if you take 4% of 15 cents and add that into the capacity and transmission fee, and then do that for the others, for the other tiers. So I don't want just a 4% increase of transmission and capacity collection. I want a 4% increase of what it costs for a kilowatt hour.
So
But you're saying-
distribution and energy too, right? I mean,
Yeah,
not,
but I think what he's saying is you want to take 4% of the entire rate, but whatever increment that is you want to jam that into the capacity and transmission fee so that energy and distribution aren't the same.
Yes.
What you're saying, okay, that I understand.
Okay.
Is
Does
that
everybody agree
consistent
with
with
that?
what Baker Tilly recommended, Laura?
Say again,
Is
Wendy?
that consistent, is that approach consistent with what we had described with Baker Tilly?
Let me double check on that. I'm not positive off the top of my head, Wendy.
Yeah, okay.
I think Baker Tilly recommended a flat rate with that adder, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, they offered both. They did a mock-up. If you look in their appendix B, they did a proposed rate. And then they showed the opt-out as either a flat rate or keeping the inclining blocks. So they made it a choice. They didn't prescribe. So I will, I'll double check on whether that is consistent with what they proposed.
Yeah. I just grabbed my Baker Tilly printout.
I did too, but I don't have the opt-out.
So I think that sounds good. I think Laura understands what I was suggesting. I think, does the board feel they understand what we're suggesting? Which is a 4% of the total cost of a kilowatt hour, and then cramming that into the tiered structure. All right. Dave, you ready to move on, or you want to keep, you still unsure?
No, I'm clear. Laura, you okay with?
Yeah, I think
questions?
what might be helpful for me is if, just to be crystal clear, we were to come back to the board maybe at the next meeting, just with a numeric example. So that
Right.
everybody can look at and make sure that we've captured the sentiment of the board correctly. I think a numeric example might be a way to be very clear about that.
Great. And
Acceptable.
and if you could give an example for an analog and for a smart meter opt-out,
Okay,
and that would be helpful too. I'm going to do public comments on this portion of our discussion, so that because we've got the time today. So Mark, do you have comments on the opt-out rate?
I do, thank you. I was going to ask if you would be willing to do that. I think might be useful for you guys to work with some kind of a matrix, and I was kind of building one on the side here, but I think that opt-out becomes difficult to use as a terminology, just because are we talking about opting out of the meter, or are we talking about opting out of the rate? And I heard you both talking about both. So
I can answer. So the opt-out, in order to, you can opt out and keep the smart meter, which is meaning you're opting out of the rate. But if you opt out of the meter, you must also opt out of the rate.
exactly, and I was clear on that. But what I'm saying is, as you're presenting and talking about it, it might even be useful to use different words so that other people who aren't following, or if you walk in the middle of a sentence, you know what you're talking about. And, you know, to the point about the additional surcharges, or I prefer to call them premiums, it seems to me that a customer who makes a rate choice might be doing it for the kind of economic reasons that you were talking about, and that's important. If they are using a smart meter which provides collections so that the light plant has clear visibility to their usage pattern, then that enables the light plant to plan for the capacity and therefore the costs associated with that usage. And so whether they choose a flat rate or a tiered rate structure or whatever rate structure they pick, you can still plan for them appropriately. And so as to the rationale of why there might be a premium for those people who choose, say, an analog meter, which kind of negates the ability to collect that data, that's the rationale. You don't have the data anymore, therefore you have to plan wider bands of uncertainty around when they're going to use the electricity because you simply don't know. And it even occurred to me while you were discussing it that there might be some kind of program around outside the premise, periodic at least checking to make sure that somebody's not only drawing huge amounts of power during peaks or whatever. Because it does seem to me that in terms of managing the distribution network and managing the capital asset, you have as the light plant, the right to know how is this really being used, and it shouldn't be possible for customers to kind of duck under that by doing that. That said, we do understand that there's probably at least two rationales for choosing an analog meter. Some people have concerns about the technology, whether it's RF or something else, and other people have concerns about privacy and whether someone has, there's a ability to really track that. And so the specific programs, I think maintaining the right to check when electricity is being used and how is important for operations. But it also, and that's probably more of a statement about how the policy around opting out of the smart meter is written and what's retained in terms of rights. So, and the last point I'll make is that I tend to agree with the comments around maintaining the tiered structure rather than just going to a simple flat rate. And I would, I've long felt that the middle tier was a little too narrow, and the highest tier doesn't carry quite enough of a premium with it. And it seems to me that once there are viable other options like time of use rates or something like that, it might also be an opportunity to revisit those tiers. And again, to your point, make it less economically attractive for somebody to just go to the tiered rate versus opt out if their pattern is high, because if they're going to use a lot of energy, then they're going to use a lot of energy and they get into that top tier and they end up paying more, and some of those other opportunities become more attractive. Those are my thoughts. Thanks for taking my comments.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Warren.
I don't know whether this is realistic, but I was thinking of whether it makes sense to present this and flip it in a different way, not as presenting it to the public as you have to pay a 4% penalty for opting out, but instead presenting it as you get a discount for going to the time of use rate.
Yep.
I think that's sort of more motivating for people that, hey, if you go to time of use rate, you're going to pay 4% less.
Yeah, well,
folks who opt out.
Yeah, so the time of use rate will become the default. So people are going to start on the time of use. So it's not going to be going to it. So the idea that, I understand your comment, Warren. That's good. Pamela.
Thank you. Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. Why are we offering any option to opt out of this? I can understand for people with health issues that we would allow that, but there's no all prices are incentives for behavior. There's no such thing as a objectively fair rate. And we have to increase rates beyond the cost because we need the money for the infrastructure to decarbonize our energy supply, both on the part of CMLP and in doing it like the solar on the middle school, and for incentivizing local residents to do it too.
Okay.
What, why
thank
are you, don't offer it.
Okay. Well,
Also,
we've,
It
so
needs to be way higher. Look at the cost for charging at the level 2 charging stations.
Mhm.
That had to be high enough to actually affect behavior.
Yeah.
It
Thank
is.
you.
Now,
Thank
when I need to tell you about,
Is
I
there
don't
another
the
point?
Concord Green charging anymore, because when you changed it to do smaller, like
So Pamela, I'm sorry, I have to keep this focused on the opt-out rate.
there shouldn't be an opt-out rate.
Well, that's what we're discussing. Okay, thank you. Charlie,
Yeah, I just had a comment on the opting out of the smart meter. If you look at some of the literature, look on the web, apparently at least 15 states are allowing opt-out, have opt-out provisions to get out of that meter. At the same time, certain states are saying, well, gee, okay, or certain utilities are saying we ought to charge upfront for the right to do that. So for example, Maryland charges $75 upfront if you want to opt out of the meter, and they charge $5.50 a month for basically to allow you to hold on to that status, because
Okay.
we're spending money to collect their usage data for billing. So again, I think back to the notion of everybody pays their share. If we're going to spend more money to manage customers who opted out of smart meters, we ought to charge them for it.
We do.
thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting structure. Dean?
Good morning, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. I really appreciate this conversation. I think to have these two alternatives for the customer presents a very interesting problem when we actually move to TOU in the first place. When TOU comes into existence, people will immediately review their electric bill, because it will probably be different in most cases. People's electric bills will just be different. And there will be some people who get hammered, and there will be some people who get a real deal. Like, oh, wow, my usage pattern gives me really a lot less expensive electricity. This is great. But the people who get on the other side of that are going to look at this and say, gee, let me run the numbers. Let me see if I can figure out whether this would be less expensive for me if I just went back. So that point at which we introduce TOU is going to be a point of inflection where people are going to literally pay attention to their electricity bill that they never paid attention to before, and they will make that choice, and they will do it on a rational basis. I think they are going to look at whether or not they would have made out with the rate that we publish, and they're going to move to it if they feel that they would have. So that's probably the main point at which people are going to choose. They're not going to run for a year and then just say, I think I'll just move over to this rate. I think they're going to have a moment of interest, and then that's the point at which they're going to move. Okay. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Pam?
Well, I'm really taken by Charlie's comment, and embarrassed that I didn't do that homework. And wonder whether we need to do more homework. I'm a big fan of really knowing why we did something, even if it's because Baker Tilly, who we respect and is an expert, tells us, even if there's not a breakout. But I wonder, I'm just curious, just the example of Maryland, are we doing enough digging on what's out there that we can choose from? And would that give us some cover if we wanted to do something like Maryland? We could say that we have others. I just wonder, my question basically is, have we done enough studying of this to know whether we can go forward with something that will be acceptable. And that also feeds in a little bit to what Dean was saying, that the initial take is going to be very important. And that gets also to our communication of what we're doing. And it has to be very clear, I think, and it has to drive people towards the choices we want them to make. Basic question, though, is do you think that you need to do a little more digging here, as Dean has done? As
Yeah.
not Dean, as Charlie has done.
Laura has her hand up, and I know she's done a lot of work on this. So why don't you, Laura, let us know?
So I want to make sure that we aren't confusing a couple different concepts. Okay, what Charlie mentioned was about opting out of to stay with the analog meter, the physical meter.
Right.
The board has already established an opt-out rate with appropriate fees. I believe we did present to the board what other jurisdictions were charging, and the board made their decision about the opt-out fees based on some of that information. So that's the meter. But what we're talking about today is opting out of the rate, which is what Dean was talking about.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
you know, the question is 4% right? And I'm just looking back on the Baker Tilly study as we were talking, and they were pretty careful to not state that they were coming up with a definitive number based on a lot of facts. They said, look, you have no meter data on which to base any information. And so, you know, we're putting a modest adder onto here. I don't think there was any science behind the 4%, which makes me comfortable going with 2 to 10%. I just don't think it should be, you know, outrageous, because there will be those who are opting out of the analog meter for health reasons who are unable to go into the time of use rate because their choice of a physical meter limits them to staying on the old rate because we don't have the data to build them on a time of use rate. So if we make the opt out of the time of use still punitive, these people who are opting out for health reasons will be paying the extra meter fees for the analog meter, and they're going to be paying more for their energy.
Right.
So we just have to be, you know, carefully keep the two concepts separate.
Okay, thank you. That's very, very helpful. My apologies.
And
Yeah,
just to make sure we're clear, the meter opt-out that was established was a $75 one-time charge and a $20 a month monthly additional meter
Right.
charge.
Right, now it's all coming back to me. Yeah, that's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Wendy.
I just want to reiterate Dean's point, because I actually do think it's important that, you know, the challenge is even consumers don't know when they're consuming their own energy. So when they're looking at time of use, they don't really know what's beneficial. So when we get to looking at time of use rate, we need to have that conversation. I think it is an important point, because we to some degree have to help consumers understand if we can, but I'm not sure we actually will be able to.
Yeah.
But anyways, thanks, Dean, for raising that. I think it's important.
All right. So
yeah.
no, I would like to move on to the next topic. If there's any more comments, we can add them at the end. I want to keep us on schedule because we're just past time to change to the next topic. So the R7 rate and time of use. Dave, did you want to take this, or did you want Laura to take this?
Laura, do you want to take it, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can tee this up. So the question at hand is whether or not to keep the current special, what we call R7 or heat pump heating rate when we switch to time of use, or whether you should eliminate that rate and migrate those customers from the special R7 rate to a time of use rate. And I did provide the board, at least, and I'm sure we'll make it available to the public, a study we did that looked at all of the CMLP customers who are currently on the special R7 rate that have smart meters, because there are some who did not. We have 36 customers who take service under the R7 rate schedule as of September 1st, 2022. And of those, 22 customers have the AMI meters. So I went back and looked at those 22 customers with the AMI meters, and I looked at the winter of October 2021 through April 2022, because those are the months when the R7 customers pay the lowest tier pricing for all their electric usage recorded on the heat pump meter. And it's also the time period when most heat pump usage occurs. for the other months, the summer months from May 1st through September 30th, any usage that's recorded on the heat pump meter is added to the usage recorded by the house meter and billed under the R1 rate according to the tier pricing. So by applying a time of use rate to each hour of the actual usage by each of these 22 customers over that winter period, we can determine what those customers would have paid under the time of use rate and compare that against what they paid under the existing R7 rate. And I provided some graphs and charts that show the outcome. But in summary, on average, the 22 customers saved a half of a penny, 0.005 cents per kilowatt hour under the time of use rate. Okay, so overall, on average, it was cheaper for the R7 customers to be under the time of use rate. However, the outcomes did range from a savings of 1.72 cents to a cost of 0.0109 cents, so just a little over a penny. And the customers for whom time of use was more expensive tended to be the smaller volume users. So for even the worst off customer who paid 0.0109 cents more, the cost in dollars was only $9 for the whole winter.
Yeah, you have a great list of these 22 customers, and I think 3 of them saw a $9 increase, 2 others saw a $3 and $4 increase, but then everyone else saw between a $2 and a $257 decrease in their billing by using time of use. And this is the existing time of use structure that we have, not the time of use that we've talked about for default, which is actually harder to save money on.
Well, actually, it was slightly different than the current time of use rate, Brian. I used off-peak didn't start at 10, it started at 8. So 8
Okay.
p.m. to 6 a.m. was off-peak, and then 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. was on-peak. But the prices were the existing time of use. Well, they were existing in 2020 during that time period. So it was like 13.5 cents for off-peak and 19 cents for on-peak, back when the R1 rate was 16 cents.
Great. And what we needed to discuss this and whether or not to remove the R7 rate when going to a time of use rate. Is that correct?
That's correct. The question we're asking the board to answer today is, are you in favor of eliminating the R7 rate and having those customers move to the default time of use rate when that takes place, when that becomes effective?
Wendy.
So I'm certainly in favor of it. I just want us to be mindful of our discussion around behavior change for time of use rate, because for the heat pump consumers, right, their expectation is they're not supposed to be altering that usage. So it's no surprise to me that they benefited in LoRa simulation, and I think it makes complete sense. It's still providing the right messages in that there's discounts, and we're incenting that technology because we want to keep doing that, right? We don't want to make a disincentive, which is what we have today under the current rate if people don't opt into R7. So I'm certainly in support of it. And we haven't set the time of use rate yet, but in principle, I'm in support of eliminating the current R7.
Great. Warren? Oh, I think you're muted, Warren. There you go.
Sorry. Would the results for these customers with time of use rate be more favorable if there was the 4% penalty for being on the default service?
Well, they wouldn't be on a default
Or
service.
would
They
that,
would be on the
is
time
that
of use
irrelevant?
rate.
Laura, you're muted. No.
I am?
No,
Yeah.
I think you were talking at the same time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think, so they wouldn't be defaulted to the opt-out residential rate. They would be on the mainstream time of use rate. That's what this simulation was.
Oh, okay, got
And I
it.
think the reason they see a slight discount, because in theory, if you're running continuously, their bills should be exactly the same, right? As we recall, time of use doesn't collect more money,
Right.
just over different time periods. So if they were flat users their bills would have been pretty much the same. I think the reason we saw some savings is because the heat pumps do tend to run at night when it's colder.
Right.
And so their usage is already slightly weighted towards the evening period. So they're going to actually benefit from time of use, even not trying to change their behavior, just running the way they are right now.
Yeah.
I also,
Well, sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
on.
no, go ahead, Warren.
I was just gonna say, I would strongly support the proposal of getting rid of this rate only because of making things administratively easier for the light plant by having fewer special rates that you have to worry about. My only concern, would those customers come back and say they're being treated unfairly because they were asked to put in a special meter and now they're not getting any benefit from having that second meter?
I can't predict how they're going to react to that.
But
But-
that's a valid question though, because we
Yeah.
have a number of different rates that have special meters that customers opted to put the meter in to participate in the rate, so. It's,
And Dave, is it the engineering possible just to put a blank in when that meter is removed, so they don't have to do additional wiring work with an electrician?
yeah, so for this particular rate, the R7 one is a sub meter, so you can just put a blank in. We do have some other ones that we're gonna have to talk about that, you know, depending on where you guys go with the other rates, you know, the separate
Okay.
meters are, you know, not a sub meter, it's a separate meter.
Yeah.
So that's a whole
Different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that some of the heat pump users didn't opt in because of the cost of that additional meter, right? So
Correct.
Right.
that too, right?
I mean, so, yeah, one other thing I want to mention is I keep hearing the time of use rate described as a way to make behavior change happen. And I fully disagree with that. It is fair collection for our expenses based on time. And yes, people will have behavior change from time of use, but that is not the direct intent. The direct intent is to collect, you know, those, it's direct causation for collection, you know, you making sure that you collect for peak fees during peak hours, and that we allow for, you know, those using energy at times when it costs us less to deliver it, to receive it for less. The habit change is just a reflection of our cost structure.
Can I ask a question about that, Brian?
Yeah.
Forgive me, I may be losing the thread here, but that takes us back to the 4, 5, 10% question. Wasn't your rationale there that you wanted to encourage behavioral change?
That's because we don't have data, Pam. We don't have data from an analog meter for when people use electricity. So we have to go with an arbitrary method. Whereas when we have data for a smart meter, and we can make time of use more directly related to when people use electricity. Does that make sense? That's
Kind of, but I don't think therefore I don't understand, and we don't need to revisit this, but I'm trying to get what our basis is for everything. And I was of the impression that the 5 to 10 as opposed to the 4 was related to behavior. I don't know.
it's anytime that we don't have data, things become arbitrary. If we have data available, we try to make it very causation, you know, we put some math and reasoning behind it.
Well, yeah, I think we're mixing, well, I don't know. I'm not
that was
entirely comfortable with the rationale business here, but I don't want to waste time on it. I think it's important to distinguish between incentive choices and the cost that we are incurring being accurately reflected in people's bills, because I do think they're different issues. But I want to make sure I understand where you're coming from, but we can leave it at that.
Yeah, so the time of use rate is going to be based on collection of expenses for the times in which those expenses are incurred. Time of use, because it has different pricing in different times, that creates behavior change, but that is not what's driving our decisions. We're not making an arbitrary time of use rate that is designed to do behavior change. We're doing data-driven cost collection.
Okay, so what you're saying is it's about what is your focus? What is your emphasis? It's not about, this is not strictly reflective of cost. It does reflect, we do think philosophically about changing behavior. And, but you're just making the point, which I agree with, that our main goal should be to be reflective of cost. Right, okay.
I'll go with the end, yep. Getting back to the R7. So your memo did a great job of explaining how those that are on the R7 now, the majority of them would benefit from a time of use structure. And I've heard from Warren that when we go to default time of use, removing the R7, he's in favor of that. Wendy and Pam, or Wendy, what are your thoughts? Are you in favor of?
Definitely in favor of it. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
that's what I said, so.
All right,
Yeah, I'm in favor of it too. I mean.
great. I am as well. So there we go. We're pretty much all on board with removing the R7 when we go to time of use. Laura, do you have what you need, or would you like any more discussion on this topic?
No, I think that you've been very clear what direction you want to take. The only thing I'll say is that when we finally do come up with the exact values for our time of use rate and the exact hours, we could rerun this study just to make sure that, you know, we're cognizant going into it, you know, what the simulation outcome would have been for those customers, because we use the existing time of use rate, and perhaps a future one will have different elements to it, you know, costs and or hours.
Excellent. All right. Well, that is our agenda. Dave, are you ready to move on to public comments?
Yeah, that was a little quicker than I anticipated, so.
Yeah. Excellent. Mark, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would. Basically, to the point about how people are going to look at this on the implementation side, I'd encourage some thought about what the period of time might be between when meters are installed and, you know, data collection can begin to occur so that some modeling can happen. And in particular on the customer communication side, because the data is available, shouldn't it be possible to give customers the information that says, had you been on the tier rate, or had you been on the flat rate, or the old rate before time of use, your bill would have been X and now it's Y, so that they don't have to, you know, do the math. I mean, it's basically running the same data through two different tier structures and telling them, you know, what the impact has been for them so that they kind of understand it. And hopefully if, you know, the cost collection and the assumption is that time of use really doesn't result in any overall difference in what the overall collection is, and then you know, your actual mileage may vary, will apply. Some people will see small increases and some people will see small decreases, but kind of like the way property tax assessment works, maybe everybody will be generally satisfied that this was just a reallocation based on what it costs to service the customer, and be real clear about that messaging.
Yeah. Hal. I think you're muted, Hal.
Yeah, I'm muted and invisible. Am I with you?
You're with us.
Okay, thank you. This is fascinating stuff, and I just love attending these meetings and watching the board and administration in action. It's impressive. My interest is in the ETS rate. And I'm going to be away for the next two meetings. I won't be able to attend the 8th for sure, and probably won't be able to attend the 22nd. I'm wondering what the best way is for me to ask questions or make comments before the board takes up the ETS rate.
So Hal, you can send me your comments and whatnot, and I can distribute them to the board.
Great, great. Okay, thank you.
All right, and I'll make sure you're included in those conversations.
Thank you, Brian.
Charlie.
Yeah, coming back to the opt-out rate, my brief perusal of the web didn't show a lot of tiered rates for opt-out. And I wonder whether others are implementing, and certainly they could be, because I maybe just didn't see it, but are others really implementing a tiered rate structure for opt-out? And I think that the opt-out tiered rate, it sends the wrong signal to have it tiered, because it basically says to the mid-range of our market that you might do better, without TOU, and don't bother electrifying because we'll be charging you for that. So it's kind of a negative incentive on the electrification side of things. Maybe that could be overcome by the premium that one has to pay, but I just wonder about this structure of providing a tier for the opt-out. Are others doing this? Have we done our research here? Back to the point that was made by PM. Who's doing this? Maybe Warren knows.
Well,
Maybe you know.
tiers are a legacy of ours in the R1, but I think that's the reason why we're still using them in the opt-out.
But we're making a big change in our structure. We don't need to continue to have a tiered structure as we make this change. That's not a necessity. I think the fact that we have an opt-out may be a necessity because it seems to be kind of a standard. But what we opt out to is another question. Again, simplify, make it more straightforward, easier for communications, easier for administration, and so forth.
All right, let me give Warren a chance to answer.
So let me give an argument as to why you saw what you saw, and then an argument for keeping the tiered rates. The argument for why you saw what you saw is I suspect that very few of those places started off with a tier rate. They had a flat rate originally. So when they went to time of use, they kept what they got. And now there's this new alternative time of use. That's actually one of the reasons why I would argue keeping the tiered rate, rather than having to explain to people two new rates. We're saying to people where you have two choices: the current system with a 4% premium or time of use rates. We don't have to explain to them, we don't even have the system that we had before. We're now going to the opt-out is putting you on a third different rate. So I think for that reason, it's a benefit to keep the tiered system. And on top of that, I'm not sure I understand Charlie's point why it gives the wrong signal to people. It's basically saying to folks that, look, if you're unhappy with what you're paying with this opt-out rate, your alternative is go to time of use.
Well, what I was just saying was simply that, I think there's probably a number of people who are reluctant to implement EVs and heat pumps because of the tiered structure.
Well, then they can go on to the time of use.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
All right.
I'm okay. I'm okay with that explanation, by the way. That's fine.
All right. Thank you. Any other public comment? Pamela Dritt.
Hi, thanks. I want to use, I understand that we want to be fair, but all prices are behavioral incentives. It's just, you can't get away from it. So we don't need to beat ourselves up because we recognize that if we make a price one way, it's going to incentivize people to behave one way. We want to make sure that the behavior that we're incentivizing is behavior that we want to incentivize. And equally, that we're not disincentivizing behavior that we want to incentivize, like residents putting in solar and switching to EVs. That we've got to incentivize the only way we can, which is with prices. And for an example, when the Concord Green meter charging station switched from hourly charges to kilowatt per minute charges, the cost to me to charge my Tesla doubled pretty much. So I simply stopped charging at Concord Green. I now go and charge at the train station, which still has the hourly rates. You can't make it fair for all my car charges at a faster rate, so it can use all of the electricity the charge point charger will allow. Whereas the people who had plug-in hybrids could only charge slowly, and they weren't using all of the power that was available. So
That's yeah, you're explaining why we changed the rate. There's the only location that has that pricing structure is Concord Green, because of our extensive discussions with Concord Green about that charger.
well, they didn't include me, did they? My point is that it is complicated and it is going to incentivize behavior. And
Okay, that's a valid point.
And what we need to know what behavior we want to incentivize and what behavior we want to discourage if you're going to set, in order to set rates, not just what feels fair.
That's yes. So that's why we're basing all of our design on the time of use in data.
And my question is, are you going to allow people who switch to, are you going to allow people to choose not to switch for a very low price?
You mean the opt-out?
Exactly. Why should you have an
okay.
opt-out at all? Because people will do that. People
Yeah.
don't like to change.
Yeah.
The default is not to.
Right.
Oh, I think we need to have, the default is you must change.
Yes, that is the default. The
And
default is everybody goes to time of use at when we're ready at some point. Those that decide have been changed to time of use and want to opt out of that would go to this rate we discussed today.
no, why? Why should you? That you will have only the people doing that who would benefit financially from it. And that
Which
is
is why
exactly,
we are adding a premium to it.
but not enough. You
Okay.
need to double or triple in order to get people who want to use a lot of electricity at peak in
Yeah.
order to make it.
I think we've heard your points.
I don't think you should allow people to have a choice that only benefits them unless it benefits the whole system as well.
Right.
So
All right. Thank you.
analog meters, yes, a separate rates for them because we have to, but not for people who have the opportunity, who are using smart meters.
Okay. That's a good point. All right. Thank you. Any other public comments? Then,
Are the meters going to be able to make, have the information and the technology to develop a local virtual power plant? with solar users and battery backup people?
that's I can't answer that. It's too technical, and I think we're at the end of the meeting.
But that's an important question.
We can take it up at another meeting when we talk about virtual power plants. We haven't discussed it as a board. We haven't discussed, we have a report on the sustainability page about that from forget the consultants company.
Yeah.
I can send you the link.
Okay, and thank you for putting the meeting materials on the website.
Yes. All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I move we adjourn.
All right, and I'll take the two motions as a second as well. Pam,
Yes.
Wendy,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
and I agree as well. Thank you, everyone. Good discussion today.